Good morning, everyone. Okay, so we have quorum, so we're going to get going. If I can have everyone's attention, please. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 3 and 7 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board if Council does not adopt an amendment within 120 days of receipt of the application for zoning and 180 days for an official plan amendment. And as you know, a comment sheet is available at the door for anyone wishing to submit written comments on these amendments. So, any declarations of interest? None. Confirmation of minutes from the meeting 55 of the 28th of November 2017. Carried. Item number 1 is Building Better and Smarter Suburbs Infrastructure Standards Review. This one's on sump pump systems for foundation drainage in new residential developments. And I know Kevin Murphy is here. And Kevin, we have a motion now that I'm going to introduce. So does anyone have any questions on this, or can I introduce the motion? Yep. So I've been speaking, and here's Alain Gauthier, and Alain and I have been speaking over the weekend. This is a particular interest to me, back when we started the Infrastructure Standards Review, because way back when the policy was first approved by a previous council a long time ago with regard to, this is how we had one of the decisions about the no trees, because we have the Leda clay soils in certain parts of our city, and so we've ended up building subdivisions with no trees. So in this case, we have, for example, in Barrhaven, areas that are built on, the houses are built on 12 feet of styrofoam, and that's to stabilize, etc. So I wanted something that would allow more of a common sense approach, so that we would write it in the plan of subdivisions. People in their home ownership would know, just like they do if they're not getting a sound attenuation fence. We write in and say, we've upgraded this, we've given you air conditioning, we've the panes on the window are thicker and all that kind of stuff. And that's been quite successful, that route. So this would be the same kind of home ownership. It would follow through the plan of subdivision into the home ownership. And so what Alain and his team needed to do was come up with a process. So he's come up with a process. There's just a couple of what we thought on the weekend might be directions, but they're better in a motion, according to Mr. Mark. So that's what we're going to. Anything to add to what I was just saying, Alain?
No, you covered very well. I think there was general consensus in terms of the approach. I think the motion that provides clarity just ensures that basically everybody's on the same level of understanding in terms of how we're going to be managing the process moving forward.
Yeah, because with the direction, well, although it's well-intentional and it often works, the people today may not be the same people in 5-10 years, and they may say, well, that was just a direction. So this gives it more substance. Kevin, do you need to speak to it, or no? Okay. So anybody have any questions? I'm just going to introduce it then. Whereas consultations have continued to take place with the development industry with respect to this report, the report being sump pump systems for foundation drainage in new residential developments, and whereas 3 modifications have been suggested by representatives of the development industry, and whereas staff concur that the 3 modifications are consistent with the intent of the report, therefore be it resolved that the report be modified in accordance with the following. The second sentence of the second full paragraph on page 4 of the report be modified to read in accordance with the following. Constructing the foundation above the post-development seasonal high water table ensures that perimeter foundation drains are only required during atypical conditions, such as a very large storm events or unusually high water table conditions, for example, during spring runoff conditions following a winter with a very high snowfall. The second sentence of the second full paragraph on page 5 of the report be modified to read in accordance with the following. The main focus of the hydrogeological investigations will be the determination of the post-development seasonal high water table with the goal, and the key here is the post-development, okay? of ensuring that underside of footing elevations are maintained above this level such that the operation of sump pump systems is only required during unusual conditions. And 3, the second sentence of the first criterion for requirements for sump pump systems on page 6 of the report be modified to read in accordance with the following. The monitoring well program shall be designed and supervised by a hydrogeologist or qualified engineer, who will also be responsible for the overall hydrogeological assessment. So the keywords there are or qualified engineer. Any comments on this? Alain, you're in concurrence with it?
Yes, Chair, we're in concurrence. It does respect the intent of the report.
But as always, the goal is to have the natural drainage feed into our system. This is in cases where we have conditions that cause you to have to build on styrofoam, cause you to do, have instability and that sort of thing, and where it's just not practical. You can imagine how high some of the buildings would have to be above the grade. Did you have a question, Councillor Nussbaum?
Yeah, no, not so much on the motion, but just on the general report. And it's more a question for Mr. Mark. It looks pretty good to me. There are all sorts of checks and balances about putting this on title and having an accessory pump and so on. But just to be sure, Mr. Mark, is there any legal risk in terms of adopting this report, adopting this standard, in terms of a future homeowner's ability to turn around, let's say the sub pump doesn't work, and say, actually the city, you guys are liable because you let this house be built? How do you interpret the legal risk of adopting this standard? It looks good to me, but I just thought it was important to check with you.
Madam Chair, imaginative lawyers can always frame a claim in order to seek relief, but it would be my opinion that it is hard to envisage a scenario where, because a sump pump doesn't work because of some design flaw in the sump pump, that the city is going to be liable for that, Madam Chair.
Yeah, and as I was saying to Mr. Gauthier on the weekend, we're not rebels with a cause with this. Okay, Toronto insists that they put them into every one of their new builds in the city of Toronto. Other places do as well. So, anyway, is that anything you want to add, Mr. Murphy? Are you comfortable if we pass this motion? Okay. Is this motion carried? The amendment and then the report as amended carried. Thank you. It's moved by Councillor Tierney, by Vice Chair Tierney. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Alain. Application for new construction at we're just going to proceed through the consent agenda now. Application for new construction at 51 Sweetland Avenue, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Sweetland Avenue Heritage Conservation District. Do I have anybody on this? I have no speakers, no delegations. Is this item carried? Okay, sure. Well, hang on a second. I've got to get some staff person here.
Sure. One might be to Mr. Mark.
Oh.
It's just with regard, and Councillor Nussbaum was there. Councillor Fleury asked 2 questions. Does anyone know if he received answers? They're at the bottom of page 2 of the extract, with regard to the neighboring owner to repair any damage to their home, and in the following paragraph, whether the question about the interim bylaw and how this related to the interim bylaw. It's on page 2 of the extract of the Built Heritage Subcommittee.
Madam Chair, if memory serves, with regard to the first point, there was an extensive back and forth between Councillor Fleury and Building Services. I think some of the questions were answered and the rest were taken offline. I haven't heard from Councillor Fleury, so I assume that he resolved that issue. And on the second question, I don't believe that this application is covered by the interim control bylaw, which is why it's able to proceed. That was a question that Councillor Fleury had, but because this doesn't meet any of the three tests of the interim control bylaw, it was felt that it didn't. That said, I think planning staff can speak to the site plan process.
Yes, Madam Chair. The application actually meets the checks and balances of the interim control bylaw, and it is going through the Sandy Hill site plan control process. And as part of the conditions of site plan control, as mentioned about the damage to the neighbor's house, before a building permit can be issued, they would have to rectify that damage because the wall, when it collapsed in July did fall on the neighbor.
Okay.
Thanks
Okay.
for indulging me.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Is this item carried? Item number 3 is the zoning bylaw amendment, parking spaces at Lansdowne Park, 945 Bank Street. Okay, we have questions, so we'll need to have Tim Mormon is here to answer your questions. Councillor, who said Tim Tierney? Did you, Vice Chair? Nussbaum, and then Brockington. Go ahead.
Good morning. Just a question. The one piece of the report that I didn't understand is I think the logic is because bylaw staff are not able to control it because people are using it as full-time parking, it's felt that there will be greater enforcement if it's metered as opposed to not metered, and I just didn't quite understand the rationale for why bylaw will be able to enforce the meters in a way that they're currently not able to enforce the no parking zone.
Madam Chair, that's part of the idea. I think the broader thrust of it was that with signs that say no parking, people are maybe less likely to comply, but if it's been considered reasonable to actually allow people to park there, the real concern was that people will show up and park and there's a sign that says they're not supposed to park there, but once they decide to park there, there's no real signal that they should not stay there for a long, long time. So the idea was that with the parking meters in place, it sends a clearer signal to people, and it's sort of counterintuitive. It sends a clearer signal to people that, yeah, you're not supposed to be here all day. The idea being that a parking meter sends a stronger signal than a no parking sign.
Okay. And with that, if the original intention was for it to be a drop-off and pickup zone, why not meter it as a drop-off and pickup zone, a 10-minute meter or 15-minute meter or whatever one normally does in those?
Well, I think the finer points, Madam Chair, of how the timing that the parking spaces will be allowed to be used for that's going to be up to recreation and I guess parking services. The idea, though, was that currently what they're seeing is that without the meters, people just kind of show up. They see even though there's a sign, there's no compelling reason not to park there. And if there's no compelling reason not to park there, there's also no compelling reason not to stay there for a long time. But if there's a meter, there'll certainly be a sense that, well, maybe somebody will come and check. So in terms of pickup and drop off, it doesn't affect the ability to use it for purely just pulling up, stopping, letting someone out and driving off. It doesn't affect that ability. It only adds a nudge to behavior for people parking short term.
Okay.
Go to Councillor Brockington, because I was going to go through consent. Now I have 2 other speakers. So we're going to just pause on this one. Is that okay to say pause, Mr. Marker, come back to it? Yeah, okay. So item number 4, we have no speakers on review of window signs, permanent signs on private property bylaw. This deals with that flashing, which is awesome. And is that carried? Okay, item number 5 is the third-party infrastructure agreement for the detailed design, tender, and construction of the bypass sanitary sewer along Johnwood Street, which makes a lot of sense to do that in tandem with the other work. Councillor Cadre, there's no other speakers. Is this carried? Thank you. Status update, planning committee inquiries and motions for the period ending the 28th of November. Is this received? Oh, wait a minute. You want me to hold it?
Quick question, or you want to hold it? It's up to you. I just want to ask staff about the...
Well, we have to hold it.
Okay.
Because I'd have to get staff up here, so I'll hold it. And then zoning bylaw amendment, 1980 Trim Road and 5157 Innes Road. It's in Councillor Blaze area. And Anna Frolic is here from Novatech. If we need have any questions of her, and if we don't, is this item carried? So, Ms. Frolic, if we're prepared to carry this item, do you still need to speak? Okay, well, thank you for being here. So the item is carried. Thank you. Okay, so we'll go back to the item that we paused, which is the parking spaces at Lansdowne, and we'll go to Councillor Brockington, and then followed by Councillor Leeper.
Madam Chair, thank you. A very basic question. The report indicates that parking would be permitted on Princess Patricia Way. Is the ring road immediately to the south where the parkland is that referred to as Princess Patricia as well? So I think that's where the parking is intended to go.
Madam Chair, that is the area that we're specifically speaking of, yes. It's on the south side of the ring road.
Right, but that's called Princess Patricia as well?
Mapping has not shown it labeled as anything else. It was a challenge figuring out how to describe it.
So just to be clear, it's the ring and not the actual main boulevard coming in and out of Landscape.
That is correct, Madam Chair. It is only on the ring road.
Okay. On your illustration in your report, you indicate only about half of that ring road would be used for parking. Is that true? And why are you not using the entire ring?
That is correct, Madam Chair, and the reason we are only recommending the one side, that is what recreation facilities asked for. They really want to put in a very limited amount of pay and display parking, and we wanted to ensure that the zoning amendment that would enable this was really restricted specifically to what they were trying to do. They're not looking to do parking on both sides of that road, so we wanted to keep it very constrained.
Well, I understand. I don't want both sides either, but I think your illustration looks about half, and I'm thinking you can probably get more cars in. They are all on the right side of that ring road, and I just wanted to better understand. I think demand is going to far exceed supply when this goes in, and if there's room to accommodate more short-term parkers, then I think that's something that needs to be thought of, and so that's why I asked what the rationale behind maybe using half the space was. But anyway, all that to say, I support this recommendation. I think that this is good for short-term parking, and I'll just leave it at that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper.
Just wondering if we have an indication of how many people are actually illegally parking there currently, and whether or not there's going to be that increased demand that Councillor Brockington is anticipating. Do we think we'll see more cars in the vicinity looking for parking once it's made legal, or?
Madam Chair, this all arose because of, I'm sorry, I get the department name wrong all the time, recreation facilities, etc. We're observing that there were a lot of people parking there illegally, and it was their determination that the best way to deal with this would be to allow about 7 parking spaces. Generally, you manage demand better with some sort of pay mechanism. It sends a clearer signal. There is always the possibility that people will park illegally elsewhere, but in general, I would expect that this would not cause further demand on parking, and it may actually reduce demand for parking.
Okay. I'm just curious whether people are always parked there. Like right now, it's based on observation rather than some monitoring and numbers. For these sorts of reports moving forward, I'd love to have some actual numbers in front of me rather than just anecdote, but there it is. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So on the item zoning bylaw amendment, parking spaces at Lansdowne Park, is that carried? Thank you. So we'll go to the questions. Status update planning committee. Question, Miss, are you going to answer the question, Ms. Sneddon? We'll see what the question is first. Councillor Hubley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question on the outstanding inquiry I have, which is to do with the street signs. In the last term of council, we had given staff direction to go away, come up with a plan for late 2014, early 2015, on how we could get through this list of street names that existed from amalgamation. So 15-year-old list for sure. And there was a plan. We did a bunch of street signs real fast in 2015. It seemed to go well, but then it has stalled. And that inquiry is still sitting there. So have we gone back to doing one street a year with hopes of getting there by the time we reach our centennial? Or I want to know, for example, if we're not going to do these street signs like we agreed to do, and two councils gave direction towards doing them immediately, I'd like to reverse some of the ones that we did as part of the lead up to this, where we actually went out to residents and said, you know, we've got to change your name of your street to avoid the duplication across the city. If we're not following through on this, let's reverse what we've done.
Madam Chair, staff certainly does have a plan for the street renaming project, and Mr. Brennan is actually here and could speak further to it, but certainly it is our intention to wrap those up within the next calendar year in terms of all the decisions that need to be made, and then there's a whole implementation that's involved with all those changes. So certainly I know a lot of work is happening as we speak, and Frank, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that?
Thank you. Yes, we are definitely moving forward with the initiative. There's been a lot of decisions made. It's my understanding that we've got about 95% of the solutions plotted in terms of the various name changes and address changes. However, implementation, as was mentioned, is taking a little bit longer than we had anticipated because we have to work with a number of stakeholders in doing so, and they will continue to be changed. I believe we're looking at about 10 or so street names a month will be changing moving forward in 2018.
So if we do, first off, both those responses are almost identical to what we heard in 2014, at the start of 2014, when we said, okay, let's get buckle down and get this done. At 10 a month, how much inventory do you have to go through? What are we looking at? How many is outstanding so we can divide that by 10?
I would have to get back to you on exactly when all of the implementation will be completed.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. It's I can't buy into this. It's like we're stalling it again and flipping it to yet a third council to try to deal with. I know. So
I'm going to suggest that you get an update from the project manager on this file, which is Andrea Gay.
Okay, and then reserve the right to come back on it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay. Question, Councillor Brockington?
Just for what it's worth, Ms. Gay did email a number of councillors recently to introduce herself as the new lead, and that she is working in our particular wards to finish some files. That she did not comment on how many outstanding cases there were, but certainly in my ward we've been doing a number of street renamings this term. Good. That's good update. Okay. Pardon? Okay. So is this item received now? Received. Okay, so before we close the meeting, it is our last meeting of the year. Well, we can do that after. Yeah. There is a final motion that takes everything from today and sends it to council that Councillor Vice Chair Tierney will move. But it is the last meeting of the year for the Planning Committee, and we get a little bit of a break. We've reached the last Planning Committee meeting of the year, and I hope that everyone can find some time in the coming weeks for some well-earned rest before we launch into the more work in the year to come. It's like the little committee that keeps on giving. There's still plenty for this committee to consider in 2018 before we reach the end of this term of council. When we reconvene in January, we'll take a closer look at what's coming up. But for now, I just want to take a quick look back at what we have accomplished together in 2017. First, I want to commend my colleagues around the table for your engagement on the planning issues we've had to consider this year. You've all continued to make principled and sound decisions representing not only the residents of your own wards, but also the greater good of the city as a whole. That's no easy task when we face sometimes divisive issues with compelling arguments from multiple sides. Of course, we would never be able to make those difficult decisions without the sound advice of our city staff. And, I'd like to take the time we have two of our leaders in this room, Ms. Nedden and Mr. Smith. And for part of the year, under the leadership of Mr. Willis and your staff, Mr. Mark goes without saying the excellent advice you always give us. Appreciate it at all times of the day. He's always available. But for everybody that plays a role, whether it's comms or whether it's our planners or whether it's our policy people, heritage folks, I said her. It is, thank you to all of you for what you do. While we don't see every development application that the city receives,
because we don't need to, thank heavens, we do see a significant amount, and it's your work that enables this committee to make the informed decisions that ultimately shape Ottawa's future. This year we considered 107 development applications that involved either zoning bylaw amendments or official plan and zoning amendments. The applications that come before us often involve larger scale projects, projects with a greater potential to secure Ottawa has a reliable, healthy inventory of building stock. That's important in making sure Ottawa remains affordable. But for every report that we consider, we need to strike a balance between the need to grow the city and the need to ensure development is appropriate for the proposed site. This year we approved a healthy mix of new residential developments, from infill projects to suburban subdivisions and everything in between. We approved several high-rise condo towers, notably in areas near future O-train stations, building on our goal of more transit-oriented development. The 22-story tower at 1960 Scott Street, for example, will offer 149 residential units near Westboro Transit Station. Along Preston Street, we approved a 25-story, 175-unit residential tower not far from the Carling Avenue O-train station and the planned Gladstone Avenue O-train station. We approved several infill projects which can be tricky because they involve building in established communities. For those infill projects that we did approve, usually there was a willingness by the developer to work with city staff to try to mitigate the concerns of our residents. Standout examples include a 4-story, 23-unit apartment building at 47 Havelock in Old Ottawa East, as well as a couple of projects in the Glebe, an 8-story retirement residence at 890 Bank Street, which we saw avoid the OMB process by the continued work of the applicant, the Glebe Community Association, and the local councillor in resolving that ahead of the OMB time frame, and a 5-story mixed-use building at 667 Bank Street. The redevelopment of 2 large urban areas currently occupied by older shopping malls was another highlight, and thank you to Councillors Cloutier, Councillor Leeper, and Councillor Brockington for your efforts on those. Those malls were Westgate and Elmvale that are reaching the end of their life cycle, and redevelopment will ultimately mean more transit-oriented residential space and better planned public space. The Westgate Mall redevelopment on the border between Councillor Leeper and Councillor Brockington's wards offers the promise of 5 mixed-use high-rise towers on the Carling Avenue site. And I hear that there's interest now across the street in the rejuvenation of that area to support it, which is very good news. The Elmvale Shopping Centre redevelopment in Councillor Cloutier's ward would change that 5.2-hectare site into a mixed-use centre that is adjacent to one of the busiest non-transitway bus terminals in the city. Suburban areas like Barrhaven are among the fastest-growing communities. Of course, so are Canada and Stittsville, which is why they play an important role in keeping Ottawa affordable. We regularly approve zoning amendments to allow for the development of subdivisions, and 2017 was no different. 2 communities in Stittsville are among the larger developments we considered, a 750-unit community along Hazeldean Road and a 720-unit one along Fernbank Road. We approve zoning changes that will see a 30-hectare subdivision along Strandherd Drive in Barrhaven and a 560-unit subdivision along Bank Street south of Finley Creek. That's a lot of houses when you think about it, a lot of places for people to live. In the east, we approved a community design plan for a 219-hectare area south of the Avalon West neighborhood, which lays out a future community of 32 to 3,600 units to support a population of up to 10,000 people. While we're on the topic of suburbs, I would also like to highlight the city's Building Better, Smarter Suburbs initiative and the related changes to infrastructure standards we approved in 2017. And in this term, Councillor Hubley played a spectacular role in helping get that through. Thank you very much. And previous to that, because this has been going on for a long time, Councillor Kadri was on the initial team that put forward issues that were important that we needed to take care of that were suburban issues. Those changes are helping reduce costs involved in building new communities and maintaining infrastructure while maintaining standards to ensure public safety. By rethinking the strategy behind the location and design of parks and residential streets, for instance, we will see more shared use of city facilities and more efficient use of land. Established communities were also in our sights this year with the approval recently at our last planning meeting of the neighborhood revitalization strategies for Hetherington and Vanier South Overbrook. And next year we will have a new pilot project in the Vanier North, or could be renamed Eastview area. We're just at the beginning of the process of revitalizing these neighborhoods, but starting in 2018, this work will make an immediate difference in the lives of residents. Building this city is not just about new construction. It's also about preserving and protecting the best parts of Ottawa. We are involved, for example, in the city's acquisition of about 5 hectares of Shea Road Woods, a popular local green space in Councillor Kadri's ward. It's rewarding to see when our work means we get to protect high-quality outdoor recreation space, and the fact that 3 developers were involved in that makes it extra special, I think. It really sees a greater consideration for thinking outside the box. The ongoing effort to establish a comprehensive and up-to-date heritage register in Ottawa is also about protecting what's important, in this case, cultural heritage values. So thank you, Councillor Nussbaum, in your role as chair of the Built Heritage Subcommittee, for all that you're doing there. The work done this year will provide some basic protection for nearly 600 properties in Lower Town, Sandy Hill, Old Ottawa East, and Old Ottawa South. I have left off one final major highlight from the year, our multi-day meeting to consider a new Salvation Army facility. There were strong views about the Montreal Road facility from councillors and residents alike. And while it was a difficult decision, there is no better example of how important the work of this committee can be. We are able to offer a platform for residents to have their voices heard and to engage in the development process. And from my perspective, this is the one chance that people in our city get to come forward and speak to us about what is important to them. And we should always be cognizant of never denying them the opportunity to do so. Planning committee meetings might not always be straightforward, but this committee makes sure the city grows in a way that is both considered and appropriate. Thanks to my fellow councillors, and in particular to Vice Chair Tierney for all his support, to me and to the city staff, and to residents for continuing to be engaged in that dialogue. We have more work ahead of us, but I think we can be proud of what we have achieved together. And I think that the news recently that showed that OMB court cases have reduced by 68% over the last 2 years. 68%. That's phenomenal, and I think that it's telltale of the work we do at the committee, of the work we do with our community associations and our developers and our staff, and how we are always resolution-oriented. And how, with the support of Mr. Mark and his team, of bringing people together and further collaborating after the process finishes here so that we avoid decisions by other people. I think we set an example in Ontario, and I know that I was talking to the mayor the other day about sending a letter to the Ontario government, and in particular our MP, Minister Nakvi, and Minister Shirelli and others, to say we have a good example here. The way we're moving forward is something that should be emulated, and I think that it's something that we should share with AMO as well. It's a work in process, but it's having an effect. So thank you, everybody. That's it for this year, and we'll look forward to next year. It's going to be another ride, I'm sure. We've got some big projects next year as well. So it'll be exciting. Does anyone have any notices of motions for consideration at our January the 23rd meeting? Oh, yes, we have to do, yeah, we have to do that, yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Whereas the reports listed in today's Planning Committee agenda would normally rise to Council for consideration at the meeting of January 31st, 2018, and whereas to expedite the consideration of these matters is desirable that they be considered for the Council on the 13th of December, 2017, therefore be resolved that the Planning Committee recommend considering the reports listed on today's agenda, items 3 and 7, as follows. At its meeting on the 13th of December 2017, pursuant to subsection 35(5) of the procedural bylaw 2016-377, 3 and 7,
Further be resolved that the Planning Committee recommend that Council waive the rules of procedure to consider the reports listed on today's agenda as items 1, 4, and 5 as follows. At its meeting on the 13th of December 2017, 1, 4, and 5. Be it further resolved that should Planning Committee approve that items 3 and 7 proceed to Council for consideration on December 13th, 2017. Recommendations within those staff reports, which refer to the Council date of January 31st, 2018, be consequently amended to change the date to December 13th, 2017.
Is that carried? Thank you. Any notices of motion? Inquiries? Other business? Okay, we're adjourned. Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy holidays.